everybody, and welcome to the All About Film for Kentmere Panchromatic 400. This video discusses Kentmere 400, as we're going to call it throughout this video, looks at how to use it, the film's characteristics, technical details as available, and copious sample images. Kentmere 400 is a fast film available in 35mm format only, and the difference in availability is that it comes in lengths of both 24 and 36 exposures, pre-wound in factory cassettes, as well as 100-foot, which is 30.5 meter, bulk spools for spooling it home into your own cassettes. My first and best tip for you with Kentmere 400 is not to listen to the people who say it's a bad film. It's really good. The tonal range is pleasing and comprehensive. The grain profile is nice. The cost is exceptional. Also, as we'll talk about in detail later, this film responded well to all the developers that I tried at all the sensitivities that I used. In general, Kentmere 400, it's a great film. For shooting Kentmere 400, I personally liked 200 ISO the best and would recommend it at that rating. And one last tip, Kentmere is a fantastic all-around film. It handled everything I threw at it well, and I cannot think of any sort of subject that this film could not handle and return pleasing results for. As for grain, Kentmere 400 has a pleasing grain structure with a very classic character and look. Kentmere 400 looks like film in the best way that I can say that. For its tonality and tonal range, that's semi-developer dependent, but overall it's very good in the mid-tones. Sometimes I would find that the film lacked a little bit of shadow or highlight detail, though as a general statement, I found that most true in high contrast scenes. I personally wouldn't take that as a harsh statement against Kentmere 400, as the exact same thing can be said for very many films. Acutance is decent to my eye. There are a lot of films with faster transitions between tones, but the acutance in Kentmere 400 is one of the things that makes it really look like it does, and also really look good. Contrast is another, and with Kentmere 400, it's a slightly flatter film compared to other black and white films on the market. Now, I personally like that because it allows me to control contrast in post, and for the best results, as a general rule, controlling contrast in post, whether we're talking about with an enlarger or in a digital workflow, that's the best place because you can always add contrast. It's very, very hard to remove contrast. For sharpness, I find that I like Kentmere 400, and I feel that it's a sharp film. Though Harman have not published a great deal of technical data on this film, such as sharpness ratings, I find it to look sharper than most, possibly all, maybe not, of the other 400 ISO films I've used in great quantity. For dynamic range, which is also called gamma, you're going to lose your shadows often. Frankly, that's just part of the look that Kentmere 400 delivers. For digital conversion, Kentmere 400 converts to digital very well, and I found the digital files from this very easy to work with. For some additional notes, the last I heard, Ilford indicated that Kentmere 400 stocks were not the same formulation as Ilford stocks in terms of the way that the emulsion is made and the specific chemistry that goes into making them light sensitive. So, personally, I tend to believe that because the films look different, and that's Kentmere 400 versus equivalent Ilford 400 ISO films. So if you see someone online saying that Kentmere is just budget HP5 or Delta 400 and that it's the same thing but with a different brand or whatever, I've seen many variations of that sort of statement online in forums. Firstly, I would ask them if they're in the Harman sales department or in the technical engineering department, and then if they are not, feel free to ignore them. I've used enough Harman films now to feel comfortable saying that Kentmere 400 is its own thing, which would agree with what Ilford says about Kentmere 400. Crazy how that works. Alright, so we're jumping straight into filter performance and skipping the spectral sensitivity curve because Harman does not provide a spectral sensitivity curve for Kentmere 400. This, fun fact, is a big part of the reason why people, who I assume wear tinfoil hats and speak freely about their friends, the gray aliens, believe that Kentmere 400 is the same as Ilford films and that Harman are just hiding that from us. So for this section, I shot 3 different images in full sun to use the full light spectrum. And I shot the same 3 scenes with a red, orange, yellow, green, blue, tobacco, pink, and purple filter. Honestly, most of these filters had no effect to the point that I think I bought counterfeit filters that don't actually work. Green looks a bit flat and muddy, orange bumps up the contrast about as much as a small pebble bumps up your car ride, blue makes the sky light enough that clouds disappear, and the red filter did amplify tonal separation of the sky and the distant mountains enough that in the mountain range series that you see in this, Pikes Peak is faint as opposed to invisible. So what filters would I use? None, not even a UV filter. An ND filter can drop your shutter speed if you want to shoot waterfalls, but don't contrast control this film with filters. Use your post workflow either in your enlarger or with digital to control your contrast or enhance it. You're going to like the results better, and it will give you more ability to experiment with different contrast profiles in the same image. Kentmere 400's datasheet includes, as per normal for Harman products, exceptional reciprocity failure data, including the calculation for it. And as usual, no reciprocity correction is needed between 1/10,000th of a second and until you exceed a full second. So let's look at how to read this chart. The line along the bottom is your metered exposure. When you expose longer than a second, in general, film stops working in a predictable manner. The exposure, sensitivity, reciprocity fails. The column on the left is the actual exposure time, and the dark line going diagonally up the middle is the line where the metered and proper exposure times meet to give you a correct exposure. Above that dark line, that's overexposure. Below it is underexposure. So let's say that you want to take a long exposure and your camera says, yo, photographer, your exposure is going to be 10 seconds. Firstly, check that you didn't hit your head because cameras don't talk. Next, that 10 seconds, it's a lie. Your camera does not compensate for long exposures with its meter readings. So look at the chart's row on the bottom and find 10. Then follow that line above the 10 up to the thick diagonal line. Where those two lines intersect, follow the horizontal line leftward, and you'll see the actual exposure time that you need for your long exposure is 20 seconds. So let's practice this. Let's assume that you need a 33-second exposure. Your camera says, hey, photographer, 33 seconds for this one. So locate the number 33, or, well, where it would belong, on the bottom row. Now next, and I'll give you a few seconds to do this, find the actual exposure you will need with the 33-second exposure. If you said 90 seconds, you would be correct. The Harman datasheet indicates the Kentmere 400 is a 400 ISO film and does not provide alternative or additional ratings and development info. The massive development chart contains times from 50 to 6400 ISO. Honestly, I tend to think that pushing 6400 ISO out of any 400 ISO film is kind of nutty, but Kentmere 400 performed so well at every sensitivity I used that, I don't know, who knows, maybe it can do 6400. I didn't try it. I only went up to 1600. I used Kentmere 400 from 50 ISO to 1600, and I will say it delivered results that were serviceable to good at every rating. And in fact, some of the shots that I took with it at 1600 were some of my favorite shots that I took with Kentmere, although I do still prefer the performance that it gave at 200 ISO. I tried 19 developer concentration sensitivity combinations with Kentmere 400. It was hard to pick 3 that I would rank as the worst for the table at the beginning of this video. The floor and ceiling on developer response in terms of image quality out of developers with this film was really narrow. The floor, by the way, was almost as high as most films' ceilings. Kentmere 400 loves every developer I put it in, and I suspect that would translate well for developers that I didn't use. Ultimately, for my favorite developer, I settled on D76 at a concentration of 1 part chemistry to 1 part water at 200 ISO, with the same developer concentration at 800 ISO being a close second. Note that the developing times for the two different sensitivities, 200 and 800, is different. Honestly, nothing I tried yielded really bad results, so I don't have any developers that I would say do not use for any reason. I would instead say, look at images of this film in different chemistries. See what looks you like out of your film. Then try that combination for your own work. Before I started shooting Kentmere 400, I had kind of bought the internet wisdom, big air quotes around wisdom, that it's a budget film and performs accordingly. It's an affordable film, and it punches above its weight class, well above its weight class. If it were available in more formats, I think that this would be my favorite black and white film. Yeah, that's probably the case. Kentmere is a good first film, and if you only ever want to shoot 35mm, it's a pretty good lifetime film too. Given the film's range, the tones, the detail it retains, and the generally classic look it delivers, Kentmere Panchromatic 400 is a fantastic choice as a primary black and white film. So here are a few key lessons that you should take away from this video. The internet is often wrong. If you hear a person say a thing, go test it. I mean, unless it would be dangerous to test it. Like, you can assume people who say licking plutonium is fine, that you can assume that's wrong without testing it. Trying a film stock that people don't like, that's not licking plutonium. So go do it. Buy a few rolls, try it out, and see if you like it. Giving a thing a chance gives you the opportunity to learn something new and, in the best case, take your own creative work in a direction you otherwise would not have. Inexpensive does not mean poor, bad, or subpar. Inexpensive simply means lower cost. Maybe the materials are less expensive. Engineering, research, development, and manufacturing equipment costs could have long since been absorbed. Or maybe the people who run the company focus on creating a product for anyone. Regardless, I don't know the reasons why Kentmere 400 is a good bit cheaper than most comparable films, but I do know that it handily outperforms a lot of comparable films. 35mm is a lot of fun to shoot, and honestly, going into this video, I had lost sight of that. Kentmere did a lot for me, more than showing me a great and inexpensive film. Kentmere reintroduced me to 35mm film, which for almost a year I had not done that much of, focusing instead on sheet film and 120 because I tend to like 120 more than 35mm. Kentmere 400 reopened a door for 35mm, and yeah, I really enjoy shooting it again. And I hope you like 35mm too. Enough to try this film and see if it suits your photographic style. I know of no photographers for whom Kentmere 400 would not have some capacity to support their work, and I think that's high praise for any film. To say that about a film that's inexpensive, made in a country with good environmental and worker protections, and also capable of delivering much more than it promises, well, that's something else entirely.